Hello again, welcome to another video of pen stroke anatomy. Today we're going to discuss the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. Now, if you're interested in the rest of the branches of the abdominal aorta, you can visit our previous videos. And without any more sidetracking, let's get straight into the topic. So, just a quick reminder, the abdominal aorta has many branches. 3 of those branches are located on the anterior wall, and they are called anterior branches or unpaired branches. And these are the celiac trunk, superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. Today we are focusing on the mesenteric arteries. Okay, so throughout the video I will try to give you some clinical correlations about those structures that we're going to do as usual. So try and follow up. Okay. So first of all, the mesenteric artery is quite a long artery, the superior one, and along its length will give a lot of branches for the column, but is the main supplier for the intestines, the small intestines. And these branches are the so-called ileal and cecal branches. Now, those ileal and cecal branches I have not represented on this picture, on this diagram, because it would be very hard to do it. But imagine that you have cut several of those through here, and you have a piece of the small intestine that's attached to those ileal branches, right? So you still have your superior mesenteric artery, and you can see that you have a lot of the ileal or cecal branches that are coming out of the artery. What you can notice straight away is that they are making arches like that, connecting to each other. And then again, from those arches, you have more arteries going out, then making more interconnections, more anastomosis like that. And you can do that 2 or 3 times, making these different arcades, which are called first order arcade, second order arcade, and third order arcade. And from those arcades, either from the second or the third order, the straight arteries will arise, and they will go right in the ileum or jejunum, right, depending on the area. Okay, so what is interesting about this is that depending on which portion of the intestine you're looking at, either the jejunum or ileum, these straight arteries have different anatomy. So the ileal branch, since the ileum is usually much more thicker, the wall is much more thicker, and you have these invaginations which are much more prominent in the beginning of the ileum, in the beginning of the jejunum, you usually have 2 arteries that run in parallel in the mesenterium, and you can see how one of them would supply one half and the other would supply the other half. While in the ileum, you would have only one artery running in between the mesenterial sheets that would go split into 2 and supply both halves. So if you're not sure about what the mesenterium is, again, I'm making a video on that, so you can go and check that. So what are the interesting, why are these differences interesting? There is something that's called jejunal lengthening. So if you're a person who has something that's called short bowel syndrome, which might be due to a lot of reasons, it might have been surgically removed due to, let's say, some, I don't know, malignant tumors or some inflammation or trauma or whatever, or it is congenital. There are many reasons for that, but short bowel syndrome is something that it's not very, it's treatable, to be honest. But you would get symptoms from malnutrition just because you have much more shorter area where the nutrients can be absorbed. So what can be done? Usually it's preferred to do it with the jejunum if it's possible. Why? Because you can see it has 2 arteries, which means it has these so-called avascular zones here and here, right? So you could cut here in between the arteries, you can cut here in between the arteries and split the mesentery like that. And you would get 2 pieces, which you can then make like small tubes, and then back and suture them end to end. So you could basically double the length of the jejunum. In this case, this would be much harder because you have this one stem here, and the transections here would not be possible because if you either cut here on here, and this would damage the entire arterial supply, and you can't even split the mesentery, which is very annoying. Okay, so the other interesting thing about the mesenteric artery is you can see it's very profusely interconnected, right? So if you have like small thromb, like thrombosis or whatever arterial obliteration might occur, if it's here or wherever, it's very mild usually, and the rest of the blood supply can more than compensate for that. But then again, that's something that's very important to remember. Although you have these many interconnected arteries, all of them start from this one trunk, right? So if you have a base thrombosis like here, that's very bad because you don't have any collateral blood supply for the small intestines. This is not true for the large intestine, as we're going to see though. Okay, so that was the small intestinal part of the iliac artery. Apart from small intestines, you have, of course, the large intestine or the colon. And you can see this is a little bit more, how to put it, filled with terminology. So, if you make in general, if you make a imaginary line here around the left colic flexure, you would see that this part here and down is supplied by the inferior mesenteric artery and branches of the inferior, and everything else before that flexure is supplied by branches of the superior mesenteric artery. Okay, so the superior mesenteric artery along its length would branch off three major colon branches: the middle colic artery, the right colic artery, and the ileocolic artery. So let's start with the ileocolic artery. As the name implies, it supplies a little bit of the ileum and a little bit of the colon, or more precisely, mostly the cecum and the very beginning part of the colon. So, if you take a look at the colic artery, the ileocolic artery, it starts as a one single trunk, which then divides into a ascending or superior and inferior branches. Now, the superior one is important because it goes back and connects to the middle colic artery, while the inferior branch would go straight towards the lower portion of the column, and it would divide into two main trunks, the ileal artery and the colic artery. The ileal artery supplies the terminal ileum and again would go back and connect with the mesenteric artery, while the colic artery would split into two trunks, one anterior cecal artery, one posterior cecal artery, and around this area you would get a branch for the appendix, which is called the appendicular artery. Of course, the anterior cecal artery would divide into a superior and inferior, into ascending and descending branches. So in general, the cecal branch would supply this part of the column. Then you have your right colic artery, which supplies the ascending column. You have your middle colic artery, which supplies the transverse column. And with that, we have exhausted the branches of the superior colic artery. The inferior colic artery would give you the left colic artery and the sigmoidal arteries and the rectal artery. Now, what you can kind of find out on your own here is that these are interconnected, these are interconnected, these are interconnected, these are interconnected right by these terminal branches, which make these loops, which connect, let's say, the middle colic with the superior, with the middle colic with the inferior colic, with the left colic, the left with the ileocolic, the middle with the right colic, right? And in general, if you imagine this entire arterial loop here as one big artery, it's known as the marginal artery of the column, which allows for a lot of, how to put it, a lot of allows for the blood supply to make up if some of this artery is partially obliterated, let's say by atherosclerosis. What's interesting is that usually in the left flexure here, the connection between the left colic and the right colic and the middle colic artery can be almost absent or very, very thin. In these cases, you have another anastomosing branch, which again spans between these two arteries, but it's not a peripheral branch, and it spans like from in between the actual stems of these arteries, right? Quite close to the beginning of these arteries. And this variable arch is known as the arch of Reulang. It basically does the same thing here, but in a different position. Okay, so if we cover this part, the inferior colic artery, you get the sigmoidal arteries are several, right? They supply the sigmoidal column, and they're 3 usually in number. And the right colic artery would supply the transverse column, while the superior rectal artery would go straight down to the rectum. You would usually see it on your dissections as a direct continuation of the inferior mesenteric artery, and it would go to the rectum basically, which I guess is self-explanatory why it's called superior rectal artery. Now, are these anastomosis useful? Yes and no, depending on the case, right? So if you have a very sharp, severe onset of ischemia, let's say like thrombosis, they can supply some of the blood to the intestine, but they cannot go and, let's say, replace the entire blood supply. What they're very useful for is when you have chronic ischemic conditions. Let's say you have atherosclerosis around this area, right? So in this case, the blood from here and from here can gradually come and compensate. And usually if you have such ischemic conditions, what happens is, let's say the marginal artery, for example, here. With time, this marginal artery can become bigger and bigger and kind of dilate because the artery is under more and more demand, and it can start compensating for most of the lost blood flow, right? So as usual, when you have when you have chronic ischemic conditions, usually these collateral blood supplies can partially compensate and with time take over most of the function. But if it's a severe acute onset, it's usually not that good. Now, one last thing, if you remember from our previous videos, when you have something that's squeezed in between two arteries, especially if those are big, nice arteries, and this thing is small and malleable, it's not very nice. And what you can see here is that the duodenum is basically found in between the abdominal aorta and the mesenteric artery. Now, usually here, in between these arteries and duodenum, you have a nice padding of fat, which kind of cushions the duodenum. But if that padding is lost, let's say due to severe malnutrition, etc., the duodenum can get kind of hanged in between those two and squished, and that basically is called superior mesenteric artery syndrome, and would exhibit with symptoms of what was the word in English? Just give me a second. Subileus, right? A little bit of difficulty for the intestinal contents to pass through this area. Okay, so that's basically it for these anatomical structures. I will try later on to go over the interior not interior. I will try to go over the iliac arteries in the next videos. If you want something more that you're more interested in, just put it in the comments down, or whatever, contact me somehow. And I hope you have a nice and productive day.